you have little baby auditors underneath you. Usually actually one, but it depends on how big the company is. You can have as many as two. Although managing two starts to become a pain if you're doing it all at the same time. It usually means that you get very little of your own auditing done. So, auditor 1. So, what you're doing is you're setting his schedule. But before you can even set his schedule, you have to... No, don't do it, cat. You have to... Let's see. Review the policy. Review policy. This isn't perfect, obviously, because this is all trying to scale. Now, that means the whole entire policy. Most auditors, most lead auditors, after a couple of times of being familiar and comfortable with a department, or I'm sorry, with a company, they won't do that anymore. But if you're billing like an external auditor, you need to set like literally 8 to 16, 20-ish hours to do nothing but review the whole entire policy, which means 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I mean, the whole thing. It takes quite a long time. You don't look at every single process and procedure, but you look at the policy, and that's going to include basically whatever they say, not only what they say their quality policy is, but the entire actual policy. So this is like 20 hours. And from there, you got a schedule. Sorry for this being sloppy. I'm doing this on the fly, and I don't have the little blocks next to me. From the schedule, usually to get the schedule, you need the entire list of departments that are covered. Now, this is going to vary by company because different companies consider different departments as to being in scope. So now scope is a big thing. Cat! Oh, dang it. Scope is a big thing because you might argue that something is in scope and they might argue that something's out of scope. And you know what? Have you had to deal with scope yet? Like if they try to say that... my YouTube just crashed, hold on. If they try to say that sales doesn't affect quality, for example, or if they say IT doesn't affect the quality of the product, then it's out of scope, if they put that in their policy. Sorry, 1 second, YouTube is catching up. Okay. So, usually all of this is pre-audit. you're actually doing this completely ahead of the audit. So, pre-audit. Now, during the audit, which will be the next part, so during the audit, you have management meeting. This is like really not scaling properly. Okay. And from the management meeting, you get management notes for the last calendar year. The caveat to this, hold on. The caveat to this is some companies like to do this less. I know I talked about a bunch of this in one of my things, but I didn't explain it from a lead auditor perspective. I just explained it from just the normal internal auditor, because most companies anymore run so lean that they only have like one auditor for the company. So it's actually really rare to have a lead auditor and an internal auditor, unless you're a supervisor and have auditors, then that makes sense. But if you're doing all this yourself, then it doesn't really matter if you're a lead auditor or just a normal internal auditor. But if all of a sudden you're a supervisor, or if you're doing external audits, like if, for example, your manager wants you to do an ISO 9001 audit of another company, then all of a sudden you gotta flip onto your lead auditor hat. So this auditor guy, he usually doesn't do any of this until like right here, where you give him the schedule, like right here, and then they may or may not attend the management meeting. They usually don't. And then they start their audits. And then they report back to you, and you tell them, thumbs up, thumbs down, depending on how they're doing. They while you're doing the management meeting, they're usually starting on the audits. And then at the end of every day, so sometimes actually twice a day. And this presupposes that you're doing all of your audits in one burst. You guys conference together. And this is a secret conference that you don't let anybody else into. Secret conference. And then after your secret conference, depending on whatever comes out of that, usually, so this is all part of the audit plan. This may seem like a lot now. Conference to management and auditors. Man, not having these block skills start to irritate me. There we go. And then you just rinse, repeat this. As soon as you start doing your own audit plans, this will become second nature to you, and you'll be like, oh, well, duh, of course. This is also called the open. There's also an opening meeting that I forgot to put in here. So, hold on. And the lead auditor gives the opening meeting. Part of it. And then usually the management of the business gives the other half of the opening meeting. Now, you don't have to do this if you're doing internal audits. Sometimes it's handled like in staff meetings, and it doesn't have to be super formal. Not having these blocks scale is really annoying. Because I can't illustrate this properly. Hold on a second. So, any questions so far? I'm going to illustrate this a little bit better in a second. Whoa, Nelly. Are any of these not? Nope. Fine. This can be illustrated in a swim lane also. And a third one of these can be like staff. Or the business. And then another one of these can be like management. There, I've created these a bunch of different ways before. Usually people read it better in Excel, believe it or not. Management meeting. Schedule. And this usually includes management. Sorry, this isn't a swim lane. I usually document all this and then put it into whichever format it makes sense later. So this is starting to make more sense as a swim lane, the way I'm describing it. So the secret conference, whoops, is only you and the auditor. I'm sorry. And then the end of day is goes down to management. And now if there's a, I know for sure this is in one of mine, maybe it's in the third one or fourth one or something, but if at any point there's a non-conformance, you immediately stop. You don't, if it's a major. If it's a major non-conformance, the whole audit stops. I know that's in one of mine. But if it's just like minors, or if you're just confused, this is when you have your twice daily with your auditors. And then at the end of the day, it gets called out to management, and then usually you've got a day or two to resolve it before you have to do the final report. So the audit, and then that kind of rinse and repeats for a while until eventually you're done. And then the audit report, and then closing, which again, everybody's at the, whoops, closing, presentation. So the lead auditor reviews it. Not sure which order to put this in. Guess it should go this way. It doesn't really matter, but you get the idea. And I've seen, this all seems, maybe to you it might seem really simple or basic, but I have seen things go wrong with every single one of these steps. Even just the final audit report, there was a guy once that didn't know how to use Excel. Or Word. He didn't know how to use Microsoft Word. There was another time where we were about to finish up the final audit report, and my laptop completely died. Like, dead. Wouldn't even power up. The motherboard fried on the third and final day of the audits. So, there's so many things that can go wrong. That's why there's a lot of redundancy here. And you keep your files saved in a couple places. Usually they keep like backups on a flash drive or on a cloud. Because no joke, my motherboard fried. Just I turned it on and that was it. Just out of nowhere. And so this is lead auditing in a nutshell. You still need to know how to audit, because back here, when you're setting the schedule, it's entirely possible that if it's only you and one auditor, that you're going to be doing half the schedule. Now, if this is a full certification, that's when you're going to be scheduling a lot more for reviewing the policy, or if they did a brand new policy. If you're doing surveillance audits, you might not do this at all if there's been no updates, or if there's a recert and you haven't looked at it for 2 years or something, you're still going to want to do this. Or if their departments have changed. Like maybe they've added new departments, maybe they've removed departments, or maybe outsourced departments. You really gotta, that's why you really gotta look at this. But like the littler, just the normal internal auditors, they might not care about this stuff because you're just going to be giving them the schedule. So yeah, that's crash course in lead auditing. You still need to know how to do internal audits, and you still need to relatively understand the business. But where you detailed need to understand is the mechanics behind it. Because it seems easy after you've done it a million times, but the first couple times, I should say audit draft, after the first couple times, you might not understand why you're doing what you're doing, or it might not be common sense to you, and so you might miss something. But if you miss, like, the management meeting, and then you don't get their management notes, you could be potentially missing, like, a major non-conformance right there. And usually, like, for the schedule, there's a couple of departments that are always review. There's quality, engineering, HR, training. Sometimes HR and training are the same department. Well, stop it. There we go. You always. Are you still with me, Sabir? these will get divided up between you guys. So there's always a list of like 6, like if you have warranty, because you're looking for metrics. Because if the warranty's bad, then you know to like backtrack. If HR and training are bad, then you know you've got a big issue. And then quality is where the rest of your metrics will be at. These are the ones you do no matter what. And then if it's a cert or a recert, you do every single department. If it's a surveillance, you grab these and then just a couple others. Okay, Sabir, so, did you get all that? Or do you need me to go over it again? Or do you want me to sort of make another video? Because the problem is that this is scalable, but there's seriously like 4 different potential reasons you could be using this, right? If it's a certification or a certification, surveillance, or if it's like internal or external. There's so many different reasons. So I don't know, like, your specific, like, if you have a chance to review the whole entire policy, or if you have the chance to make your own schedule, because if you're the lead auditor, you need to be reviewing the whole entire policy at least once a year, which that should be in document control anyway. You should be setting the schedule, and the schedule should be known by everybody. You got to be negotiating with management the scope and all that. So that's what being a lead auditor is. But I don't know how much of that I need to explain, because it's complete and total common sense to me. But I can't like imagine what your business is. So you have to be able to read this and sort of tailor, like, imagine your business. So you have to kind of imagine what the policy is, and then you have to like look at the whole entire list of departments and prioritize quality, engineering, HR, training, and warranty. And then if it's a brand new audit, you got to do all of them, and that could take weeks potentially if you're going through like you don't go through every procedure. You take a sampling and then kind of plan over a 3-year period. If you're internal, even if you're external, if you're doing a brand new certification, you actually need to go through every single department and very nearly every single process. But that could take months, and so that's why like a really good auditing plan, internal auditing plan, is done in like quarterly cycles. And you try to do the whole thing every single year. And then within the 3 years, you'll have hit every single process, upstream and downstream, system-wise. So, this is one way of doing it. This is the way I recommend. The other way that somebody might teach you is that you go through section by section. So you have an audit for, so this is how we put a document. Oh, you mean Microsoft Visio? This software program? This is called Microsoft Visio, if that's what you mean. This is how most companies put their documents together, although some companies have a proprietary versions. But you can take this and throw it in a Word document or whatever, if that's what you mean. But every single step in here, though, is going to be its own document. This is a document, this is a document, this is a document, this is a document, this is a document. Every single one of these is going to be a document. This is going to produce a bunch of records, and this is going to produce a bunch of records. This usually doesn't get written down unless something bad happens. Same thing with this. And then this is going to produce a bunch of records, and so is this, and so is this. And then if you were external, there would actually be a whole nother set with the bidding process and the registration process, which is expensive. But it depends on if you're making money or if you're spending money. So does that? I hope this answers your question. I've never made a document like this before, except for internal business units, because usually I was the one doing all this, so nobody else really cared except for external people, and most of them had been doing it for like 30 years, and so it was all in their heads. And I had never had to train like a new generation of lead auditors before, because usually like up and coming management would just spend 5, 6, 7 grand and send themselves to a week-long class and come back, and they still wouldn't be any smarter at all. But this is the short version. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you can take a screenshot or something. I could do a much cleaner version of this, but you get the idea. Basically, these are swim lanes. And then you create a smaller version of this if you're doing it at the department level instead of the entire business. So also, if you were external, there would be another step here where you actually give them the formalized non-conformances if there was any. But internally, that's done right here. Externally, it's done outside of this process because they have a set amount of days to respond, then a set amount of days to fix it contractually, otherwise the crap hits the fan. So that's interesting, but training you to be an external auditor is very proprietary because every agency does it different, and every single one of them thinks their way is the best way. Oh, I guess it's my cat's time to come and yell at me. Good, you got a screenshot of it. So to be honest, most of your time is going to be spent scheduling, because after you've reviewed the policy, you're usually taking a lot of notes and asking yourself a lot of questions. And then all those questions get worked into the schedule. And then you propose it to management and start arguing about the scope, and hopefully management doesn't turn into a bunch of jerks. If they start getting defensive, then you just keep writing more notes until you get to the bottom of whatever the problem is, whether it's just their nerves or where there's an actual issue. Then that just kind of cycles back into my training, where you just be nice and kind to everybody and put on your auditor hat and do your best. So yeah. And for everybody, this is going to be just a little different. Guess I'll make a clip of this and put it on the playlist or something. See, hopefully this will help some more people. Just, in my opinion, most lead auditor training is garbage. If you get good basic training from a good registrar, you can pretty much figure out the rest yourself. You don't need lead auditor training teaching you things that you should be able to figure out on your own. Usually just an excuse for management to take a week off and waste tons of money so they can get a slightly cooler certificate than everybody else. It's kind of like I can't think of the right word. Oh. Cool. You think any other questions? I mean, in my opinion, there's just kind of basic internal auditor training, and then there's just working with registrars. All the in-between stuff is just sort of your own personal journey. You're going to get most of your knowledge flat out just working with registrars, because they do it every day tons of companies. They are a wealth of knowledge. And you just ask them tons of questions, and that's where you're going to get most of it from. So just keep thinking of more questions, because asking questions is how you're going to learn. Having somebody do it for you is a little bit helpful. So, especially if they're inside your own company, so you can figure out where everything is. But if you have good representatives for each department, they'll be the people to help you with that. And then the rest of it is just going to boil down to how cooperative management's going to be. And how cooperative the departments are going to be. And there's only so much of that, that you can influence. The rest of that boils down to whether or not you got management support, which is part of the standard, thankfully, and whether or not you have department support, which is right there in the standard. So if people aren't giving you what you need and you explored every avenue for cooperation, you just start writing them up. That way when the internal audit comes, you don't get in trouble. But for the most part, as long as everybody isn't scared, they're usually super cooperative. That's what I've found. The only times I've only ever had a couple of bad instances, and about half of them were management being jerks, and then the other half of them were employees that just wanted to be combative and just threaten. Hopefully you don't get a lot of threats. I only got threatened a couple times. That's where you just got to be professional and document it if you have to, but that's why you always keep a manager with you, or that's why you always keep your rep with you. So therefore it's not, your word against somebody else's. So, but as a lead auditor, and as you get more and more confidence, and as the customer's business gets more confidence in you, you'll have less and less of that to worry about, because everybody will look up to you instead of the people who are. Do I have an example of what? Which thing? Sample of what? The most important thing is that you write down every single question that you have. Now, it's going to be funny because the longer you have the ISO 9001 policy in front of you, the standard in front of you, you'll realize that almost all of your questions are actually in it. It's just that they're a little vague. And they're vague because the ISO leaves things open to interpretation a little bit, so it can be flexible. But sooner or later, you'll learn to trust the standard, and you'll realize that almost all the answers are in the standard. Very, very little of it is actually more complicated than it needs to be. It's just basically the engineering part, and the reason why the engineering part's complicated is because TS 16949 usually covers engineering, and so ISO 9001 covers engineering enough to where you make sure that they're not building the wrong thing completely. Other than that, most of it's going to be covered in corrective actions, continual improvement, lessons learned, and warranty. I'm helping one of my subs that is here for all the auditing stuff.
Yeah.
Not the. It's like right in my book, and he starts asking me all these auditing questions. So I'm like, oh, let me switch. Let me switch to the auditing stuff.
Yeah.
So he's like, hey, teach me how to be a lead auditor. I'm like, okay. Hold on.
Yeah.
So I wrote like this whole like giant lead auditor procedure like on the fly.